This FedGov Today program is sponsored by Maximus. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, change is definitely coming to the Pentagon software pipeline.
A lot of these guys are based on, I want paper-based risk assessments, right? And then I will review those over a couple weeks and then send a letter up for someone to sign. The world can't operate that way anymore.
Rob Vietmeyer on FedGov Today in just a moment. Uniting program strategy, advanced technology, process, and execution for a more efficient government. That's Maximus. Every program, every service, every time. That's innovation forward. Learn more at maximus.com/federal. Big changes are coming to how the Pentagon buys, builds, and deploys software. Pentagon leaders say those changes include both software development and acquisition. At ACT-IAC's Imagination ELC recently, I hosted a conversation with Rob Vietmeyer, the department's chief software officer, to learn how all these efforts are coming together.
What's the risk component for all of the things that you're doing, and how do you assess that in your particular portfolio as you're driving software all across the department, as you're interacting with the services, as you're interacting with the fourth estate, as they're trying to do these technology and software transformations?
Wow, okay.
When we have 18 minutes and 40
18 minutes, 40 seconds, I can cover it. So let me start at the top level of risk, right? And then we'll drive down from there. So what we're realizing, right, and the secretary said it great, right, is that software-defined warfare isn't a future construct. It's there. It's now, right? And that's really a profound change for the department of how we've reorganized. And you've seen a lot happen on the acquisition side of things, that we have to retool how we are driving acquisitions. And then I'm trying to fill in, okay, that's great that we're retooling the acquisition side, but there's this other technology component that's really essential. And we're starting to realize that we've got this feedback from the combatant commanders is that we can't operate the way we need to operate given the technology that we have now, the approaches that we've been using. And so we have to retool. And I think a great example, just to tell some stories and be a little more definitive about some of the things we're talking about, is we did with our CDAO and Joint Staff counterparts and our 5.5 counterparts, we ran an exercise called HIMAST, where we said, okay, we're going to go to this next stage of software-defined networking, zero trust, implementation, really modernize the architecture. We're going to deploy it on a British carrier strike group that had US, Canadians, and a whole host of other nations sailing with us. We did that, started about 9 months ago, left from the UK, went through the Suez, and then out into the Pacific and then back. And so we're trying these new technologies out. Because in the past we'd organize our networks and we'd have these big, strong network boundaries, and the information would be only shareable within these groups, and if we had to share with someone else, we'd create a whole nother networking infrastructure. And that wasn't going to work, right? And so if you think about just some of the scenarios we're running through, a carrier strike group, let's take airspace deconfliction, right? Kind of important thing to do with different countries. So you're going from EUCOM to CENTCOM to INDOPACOM, other nations that you need to coordinate with throughout. And so we're now taking this network fabric and we're plugging in all these different nations that have to participate. So it's not just the Five Eyes and we're all going to share this stuff. It's, okay, at this point in time, we are configuring the network and tagging the information to be able to share it securely with these groups of nations with EUCOM systems. And then we have to, the carrier moves, and now we have to reconfigure all the networks and all of our security boundaries and all of our operational boundaries. And now we're dealing with the whole host of other countries as we're moving through CENTCOM and other systems that are being, fed in and out. And then we move into INDOPACOM. So we're now getting this picture, what does it take to really operate in in the modern era where the commanders are saying, listen, I need to be able to collaborate. I need my networks to reconfigure dynamically on who I'm collaborating with. I need the system to retool itself instantaneously as we need to bring in new partners. So we started learning, hey, driving software becomes absolutely essential to being able to operate in this type of environment. We learned lessons like, so we're feeding policies, and I mean technical policies that are reconfigured. These are software, so Rego and OPA, into reconfiguring the security of the network itself and who can participate and the connections dynamically through this. We're learning things like, oh wait, we have to think through now software policy management, these technical policies, because yeah, we can define high-level policies, things like, hey, if it's tagged secret, then it means certain things, and that stays pretty persistent. If it's tagged releasable to, and we're changing these countries as the carrier strike group's moving through, that's another level of dynamic configuration. And we're feeding these configurations in, and it's changing firewalls, it's changing our software-defined networking, it's creating new micro-segmented, protected zones for enable this collaboration. So we're starting to learn, like, software, your ability to drive software, to manage software is absolutely essential to where we need to be. I think, and taking the story down to other agencies, it's absolutely critical as we're having this shared services and this AI conversation that your ability to manage and deploy software is essential in that space. So we see folks like, one of the public things that's been released is, Amazon claims they publish to production every 17 seconds. So thousands of updates a day, right? We look at the SaaS providers. They're in, to be successful, and it's a differentiator, you're in the hundreds to thousands of updates per day. When we talk about folks being online shared service providers, and I've listened in on some of these conversations, that key to being successful, being responsive to users and also being responsive to the cyber defense needs, the defense of cyber operations, your ability to move at speed is essential to that, right? So getting smart at managing risk is now getting down to how fast can we be at managing software. And then we could go into a whole nother thing on cybersecurity risk. But
okay, well, and we won't today, but we will do that at some point, Rob. What did you learn, if anything, about processes and deployment of software from the Five Eyes organizations that you were involved with? Did you take anything out of that where you said, we don't do that, but we should?
I think in this first go-round, we were really focused on at the core networking layer and implementing software-defined networking and data tagging sorts of things. So we had a set of engineers, and it was primarily more than a proof of concept. We were doing this in live exercises, and it was highly successful. The sailors and the folks involved were like, "Don't take this away from us. We really need to have it." And we're like, "Well, we kind of put this thing together really quickly, and a little bit of duct tape here and there, as you might imagine." And then had just a tremendous amount of really competent people that could get in there and configure if we ran into a change. What we learned was that's not sustainable, right? What we need to be able to do is have pipelines on the backside that are managed, that are there and persist, and that we know how those pipelines interact with one another. And by pipelines, I mean continuous integration, continuous delivery types of pipelines. So your software infrastructure, so your ability to deliver that software. So the conversations that we're having now is we're trying to take those same design specs that we used and proved out in the high mast. We're now working with both with Five Eyes to build out the next generation Five Eyes warfighting network. We're taking those same concepts and implementing them with NATO. for the next environment there. A lot of great feedback from our partners on both sides. And then we're taking these design patterns out into Indo-PACOM right now and trying to implement that. And as we take these design patterns that we've proved out in exercises and we've proved out in a less than production type of environment, right? That one of the keys for us is going to be how do we build out, these production-ready pipelines, right? The pipelines that can feed changes into production environments at multiple times a day and reconfigure and get smart about, because as you get to that level, you can, zero trust is great, but if you make a mistake, then you could execute a denial service attack on yourself, right? So you have to be pretty smart about understanding, back to that risk model. So it's not just speed, it's also, your ability to model and make sure that test out these behaviors so that you understand that the impacts you're going to get.
So what you're trying to accomplish there ties to something that you and I talked about offline earlier this afternoon. And that is, you've used the term retool a couple of times in a couple of different contexts, but the way that you used it in that conversation was retooling at speed. Yeah. And that's essentially what it sounds like you're trying to do there. How do we go at the speed that the uniformed personnel demand, rightfully so, at the same time we got to give them that capability as fast as humanly possible or as fast as the machine can give it to them, but also we have to do this retooling at the same time. So whatever analogy you want to use about turning a battleship or whatever.
Right. No, turning a battleship is, I think, there's certainly the retooling aspect of building out capable CI/CD pipelines, right? That's kind of common practice now. We have models we can push now, infrastructure as code. You need a CI pipeline, boom, 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 boom. What we're finding is the hard part is we can do continuous integration, and I'm sure most people here are doing continuous integration. Continuous delivery, getting past hey, I've got this piece of software, I think it does what it does, and getting to, now I built into the pipeline, as soon as the pipeline says it's done, and it's in production. That last piece, right? And so the cultural change is one of those areas where we need to retool, right? So we can put the technology in there, but that's not the roadblock now. The roadblock is, hey, and back to their cybersecurity risk, right? One of those areas is we've bolted on cybersecurity risk management at the end. It can't happen, right? Cybersecurity risk management needs to be fully automated in the pipeline with appropriate control gates within that pipeline. So when the pipeline says it's done, the AO agrees, right? That their SCAs, their risk posture is captured within that pipeline, and we escalated the authorizing official's job is no longer to approve a single thing. Their job is now to sit up on top and say, okay, this platform, this pipeline, these security controls, these people, I trust them to automate and deliver because I've been able to tool in automate my requirements into those platforms and those processes that are represented. So is that part of that? But the platform adoption and the CI/CD automation sorts of things that we're going to get after that become really critical, and that changes how just I'm picking on our cybersecurity guys, but it changes how cybersecurity guys work, right? That a lot of these guys are based on, I want paper-based risk assessments, right? And then I will review those over a couple weeks and then send a letter up for someone to sign. The world can't operate that way anymore, right? So change.
All right. The last time you and I talked was at TechNet Cyber back in April, May, something like that.
Yeah, you hijacked me. I'm sitting there, we're having a conversation.
You hijacked me?
No, we're having a conversation. Next thing I know, the lights are on, I got a mic on.
No, that's not how it worked, Rob. Don't tell people that, because then they'll think that's
Watch
real.
out. Oh, yeah.
No, they'll think that's real, and then they won't want to do it.
Yeah. But it was a great time. It was a great experience.
At any rate, one of the things you and I talked about, Stacy Piszczanic and I talked about there, was about the time that the software acquisition pathway first came out. And since then, there have been a number of other acquisition pieces that have come out regarding software in particular. And then, of course, the big rollout from the Secretary, 2 weeks or so ago, I guess it's been, on acquisition reform.
Yep.
How does all of that affect the way that you go about your portfolio at this point?
Yeah, and I hit on it at the beginning. I think that what we're now doing is, and we work very closely with our A&S and our R&E counterparts to make this happen. So these are very synchronized activities. So as we're retooling in emphasizing the software acquisition pipeline, I love the Secretary's memo when he first came in and said, listen, just because it says software in the front doesn't mean only software, that this should be the default pathway. For everyone, we're taking that same acquisition pathway, sharing it with our partners in NATO and Five Eyes, and saying, hey guys, we have to retool acquisition here. And then what we're coming in, my job is then, okay, from a technology perspective, what does that look like? I mean, how do we retool our side of that equation in some of those areas we talked about, like integrating CI/CD pipelines, making sure they're mature, making sure we have full security assessment and automation capabilities built into those, making sure that we have our cybersecurity folks and our operators. So we'll pick on them now. Like this full from the user experience. How do you try to pull that all together? So. One of the things, and just pre-announcement, because I just dropped it into formal coordination in the department, is we have a software instruction coming out, and hopefully, it's in our formal process that WHS runs, but hopefully in a month or two we'll have it out there for folks. We did coordinate with all these groups to try to put it together to really codify what it means to operate from a software in an environment where we're going into software-defined warfare, right? Or and how do we start to retool? So recognizing that we have talked about IT asset management and software management and things like licensing and counting desktop seats and things like that, which is all good and in the policy. But now we have to retool to what's it really mean when your mission is relying upon your ability to push reliable, secure software multiple times a day, right? And so we're trying to retool inside the department. And I'll say, back to the industry folks here, we are also assessing with the MILDEPs the pipelines from our partners as well. We haven't done that, so we, I'm glad you didn't throw in CMMC, but
I didn't get a chance to.
I know. Well, you mentioned Stacy, so CMMC for me was a 10-year journey to get here. I know for many of you, it's like, oh my God, it's here now. But that was 10 years just to get to. Hey, here's some basic cyber hygiene things, and we know our adversary is targeting our industrial-based partners and stealing information out. You guys need to raise the bar. What we need to do is continue on that. So what's it mean to run a secure pipeline? What's it mean to deliver secure products? We're having that conversation right now within the department in terms of establishing some standards, raising the bar a little bit on as we understand that not only are our missions relying upon these are becoming an increasing target, like 700% year over year growth in the attacks on our pipelines and your pipelines. So you'll see more from us about having this conversation about, for us to move into this world, it can't just be the department side. We have to have this conversation with our industry partners, and that's going to take us working together about, okay, guys, if you're delivering multiple times a day into a warfighting environment, how are you going to run your pipelines? How are we integrating our security protocols? How are we tying in, our dev and our ops environments much more seamlessly as we rely upon our industrial-based partners moving forward? So I think that's a conversation we're going to be having here over the next year, but it's a pretty exciting one and absolutely essential.
The Pentagon's Chief Software Officer, Rob Viekmeyer, at the ACT-IAC Imagination ELC. You can read more about everything I talked about with Rob on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. And my thanks to ACT-IAC for inviting me to be part of the program. The new president's management agenda features three main areas of focus for the Trump administration's second term. Two leaders from the first Trump administration, Margaret Weichert, the former deputy director for management at OMB, and Emily Murphy, the former administrator of GSA, are on the next FedGov Today podcast this coming Tuesday. You'll learn how leaders in this administration are likely to implement the new PMA. You can listen to that show and every FedGov Today podcast anytime you want on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on demand at fedgovtoday.com. I'm Francis Rose. Have a great weekend. Thanks for listening.